Hi there, I'm Tiff. This is Tiff Reads Books, and I thought I'd do something a little bit different and give you my list of my top 3 winter Stephen King books. The weather has decided that it is going to be winter. We are skipping fall here in the Pacific Northwest. We haven't got any rain. It's just been sunny and cold. Cold. Everything's frozen. So I thought, what a better time to talk about my favorite scary winter books by Stephen King. I had to go and acquaint myself with these books because I haven't read some of them in so long, but they are like one of those things where I just remember being enthralled by the book and being like, oh my god, I love this. So I had to go and refresh myself, and as I did, of course, I was like, oh yeah, that happened, and then that happened. So I think what we'll do, we'll start with the oldest and we'll go forward. So that means we'll be doing my favorite last. So in no particular order of enjoyment, we have The Shining. Okay, so everyone knows The Shining. Like, even if you don't read the movie, the Stanley Kubrick movie is like iconic. I wasn't the biggest fan. And I also remember watching, when I was in high school, Sci-Fi, the Sci-Fi Channel did like a 6-hour long miniseries. And I was like, okay, maybe they'll get the story right. And then they didn't. They still did it wrong. And I was so upset. So, okay. So The Shining was published in 1977. So this is the oldest one on this list. And it is set in the Colorado Rockies in the middle of winter. So we have the Overlook Hotel, where it shuts down through the winter. It's mainly for like wealthy tourists and stuff. And during the winter, they have a caretaker there because it gets snowed in completely. No way in, no way out except for snowmobiles. And basically they give the caretaker everything he needs for the winter, and he can spend that time there just kind of making sure everything keeps running, keeps doing what it needs to do, boilers working, all that stuff. So we follow Jack Torrance, who is a writer, who is an alcoholic with a really bad anger problem. And he has lost his job as a teacher because of assaulting a student, and he is also in a fit of alcoholic rage, broke his young son's arm in the past. So him and his family have a very tumultuous, rocky situation that they're dealing with. They are trying to fix things. He's trying to put his life back together, and he thinks that spending the winter trapped together where they can't leave is the perfect solution. You know, as you do. Danny is his son, and Danny has what Stephen King likes to call the shine, and I think this is the first time he's mentioned it, but it gets mentioned in other books. He loves to talk about telekinetic powers and telepathic powers. I'm reading The Institute now, which has both. There's tons of other books that have both. We have people with the shine coming through, and it gets randomly referenced in a lot of his books. So Danny has the shine, and he has low-level telepathy. He can read emotions, he's clairvoyant, he speaks to ghosts, and he's very young. This is also kind of standard in a lot of Stephen King stories, with young kids being able to have stronger powers. So Jack brings his whole family to the Overlook for the winter. We get introduced to a couple other characters, one that will kind of come back later, which is the chef, Dick Halloran, who tells Danny that what he has is the shine, and Dick has a little bit of it too. This goes into Stephen King's whole magical black man trope that he likes to use, or magical black person. I really recommend, I'll try to put like a screenshot right here, looking at Nnedi Okorafor's article on Stephen King's trope. That it's not just his trope, it's a trope in media, but Stephen King has used it quite a few times, and I really recommend reading the article. It's really interesting. So this is one of his recurring tropes that we see later on. We get it in The Stand, The Green Mile, and there's one more that I can't think of in the moment that have that character who the Talisman, the only character in the story who is a person of color, has some sort of magical powers and is really only there to serve the main character's story. I recommend her article. It's really interesting. There's lots of other articles on this too, but hers is really well thought out. And this is a true haunting story. So when they get to the Overlook has other ideas, and it is a true haunted house, and it starts to possess Jack, and a whole bunch of stuff goes down. That's kind of the gist of it without big spoilers. I really recommend it. I read this when I was 15, I think, and I read it in like 3 days because I first night, I just kept reading through the night because I was too scared to sleep. I have big response to horror books and movies and have always been afraid of the dark. I get night terrors and a little bit of sleep paralysis. So if I get scared at night, I tend to just keep reading. So I think I read this in a couple of days at the time while going to school because I just couldn't put it down because I was terrified. This is when I decided I had to have 2 books going at a time, one book that I could read during the day and one I could read before I went to bed. So I really recommend this one. Also, there's the sequel to it, actually is really good. It follows Danny as an adult, and we go back to the Overlook, and we kind of learn a little bit of the power that it has and why it has that power, and the sequel is really good too. It's a little slow, but I did really enjoy it. It's called Dr. Sleep. And that one it's really good. Okay, so that's The Shining. I definitely recommend it. I don't own any of these books anymore because I had them all in paperback, so I'm working on re-getting them. Misery is the next one. This one was 10 years later, and actually the year I was born. So Misery was published in 1987, and this one is more of a psychological thriller with horror elements. And this is where I personally think that Stephen King really shines, is when he writes like the true horror is people, that people are truly horrible. And these tend to make me more kind of anxious in general than like actually scared. The Shining has a lot of like jump scares and like stuff like that are just like, yeah, this is more about the horror of people. So this follows Paul Sheldon, who's a romance author, and he has just written the last installment of this long romance series that he's written about his main character, Misery Chastain. And in the book, Misery, his main character, dies. And because he's done writing romance, he doesn't want to write it anymore. He wants to write like cop thrillers. And so he's decided he's going to change what he's going to write, and to celebrate decides to drive himself home across the country and decides to get drunk and drive through the snow in Colorado. And of course he crashes. And when he wakes up, he has been rescued by Annie Wilkes, who is a retired nurse and kind of runs a small farm, like personal farm. She's got like a cow, which there's a horrible scene with that I remember the description of. It's not graphically horrible. It's just like, oh my God, why? Anyway, a description of why cows have to be milked every day is included in that story. Anyway, so she has this small secluded farm where she takes Paul to help him recover. And because she has realized who she is, and she claims that she's his number one fan. And so she's going to nurse him back to health. But in the meantime, she gets really excited because she has just discovered that the last book has been published. So she gets it and she reads it, and she is pissed at Paul. And she decides she's going to keep him there and make him rewrite but fix the ending, which reminds me a lot of Misery, or not Misery, Secret Window. We're talking about Misery. Reminds me a lot of Secret Window. You have to get the ending right, okay? So she decides this is not the ending. This is not how it's going to go, and he cannot kill off her favorite character, so he will be rewriting that book regardless of what condition he is in, and she will make sure that he does it, and he does it right. So, it is a snowed-in, trapped prisoner story, and in Colorado. So both stories in Colorado, both like very different, both equally like terrifying. I mean, there's a lot, I don't want to spoil it, but basically she does some pretty horrific stuff to him and gets him very hooked on painkillers. And he ends up just uncovering some stuff about Annie and who she is and what her past was, and it's very like more and more down the road of like terrifying. I kind of do wonder with the way that Annie was written if she's inspired a little bit by Nurse Ratched and that type of thing. So definitely recommend it, especially if you like things that feel a little claustrophobic and basically we're stuck. There's no way out. Everything is hopeless. Definitely a good one. That leads us to my final one, which of these top 3. So Dreamcatcher. This was published in 2001. It is very controversial, as far as I think it is one of Stephen King's lowest rated books on Goodreads. It is, according to Goodreads, one of the lowest rated books I have read this year because I reread it this year. I love it. I loved it from the beginning. It's one of my favorites. And I think some people also don't like it because Stephen King said that it's his, in like 2014, he was like, yeah, Dreamcatcher is one of my least favorites. And he talked about how he wrote it when he was very, very under the influence of painkillers from when he got hit by the van back in 99, 2000, somewhere around there. And I guess I can see like the influence of that in this book. So Dreamcatcher, we follow 4 main friends, Pete, Henry, Jonesy, and the Beeve. And these guys are about in their 40s. We start following them from the time that they are young teens when they meet their friend Duddits, who is, I can't remember, he has Down syndrome. And they protect him from being bullied, and they kind of make him part of their friend group. And that part's a little wholesome. I'm not sure how the representation is as far as people with Down syndrome, because Stephen King likes to do this thing where people who have disabilities have magical powers. And so there's that element to it, but I do feel that it's done with a bit of respect and care. And so Duddits has the shine very, very strongly. And because of their friendship, the other boys are able to get a little bit of the shine. They call it seeing the line. And they kind of drift, they grow, but every year they come back and they do this hunting trip. Duddits never went with them on this hunting trip, but the main boys did. And so they're about to do their hunting trip this year, and Jonesy has been hit by a car and broke his hip, which is exactly what happened to Stephen King. But when he does it, he's seeing, like when he gets hit, what makes him cross the road is something to do with the shine and a premonition. And so then everybody goes on their hunting trip, and an alien invasion starts. And the way that it starts is so horrifically disgusting that there's a lot of descriptions of bodily fluids in this book that I was like, oh my God. Like, that is the horror part of it, is the descriptions. There's a lot of gore. There are the aliens, you breathe them in as a fungus spore, and then they develop in your intestinal system, and they burst out from the back end as something called a shit weasel. So that is part of, I think, why people don't like it, but it kind of gives it this weird campiness that I really enjoy. But overall, it's my favorite because it's about friendship. Like, the men and the way that they interact with each other, they do everything in the story for each other. It's not just to save, like, the world. It's also to try to save the other ones. And the way that the friendship is described, and I really like the way that Stephen King writes adult male friendships. I think he does a really good job with it, and I don't think it's something we get portrayed, particularly in the horror genre, very well, very often. And it's very nice to see that type of story, and I enjoy it for that aspect. It is also weird and fucked up, and none of it necessarily makes any sense, but the writing is done in such a good way that you can follow the story. And I just really enjoy it. The movie is trash. I refuse to watch it. I watched the ending because my sister made me. And it does not end anywhere close to the way the book ends. And I was very upset. Very, very, very upset. Because I actually think the book handled Down syndrome better than the way the movie did. And the movie was much more offensive about the way that it handled it in the ending, in my opinion. It is set in Maine. It's set during the snow. Everything happens in the snow. Lots of, like, imagery of, like, bright red and gold fungus on, like, white snow and stuff. And it's that eerie, quiet, secluded feeling of snow. We also have a big military presence and a lot of commentary that's anti-military, which seems to be something that Stephen King likes to do as well. And I just overall enjoyed it. Okay, so you might not, but I really did. So, varying experiences with these books. Misery and Shining are often considered some of his best stories and best adaptations to film. I actually read Misery because my mom said the movie was one of the scariest things she's ever seen. My parents don't read, but my mom said the movie was one of the scariest things she'd ever seen, and that my grandmother loved the book. So I went, let's read Misery. And I do not regret it. It's in there in my top. Okay, so a few honorable mentions, because we are coming into the end of November. 11/22/63 is kind of, it follows a year, but a lot of our main instigating events happen. The beginning of the book happens in October, November. The end of the book obviously happens in October, November. So that one kind of has some fall, wintry vibes to it. Pet Sematary, a lot of it takes place around Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's not necessarily the vibe of the book, but it does work really well for fall coming into winter. And then The Stand, the end part of The Stand, when the men have gone on their mission and they're on their way back, and everything kind of culminates in a snowstorm. So we do have a bit of that near the end of The Stand, but it is a very long journey to get there. So kind of, if you want to start something in the summer and end it in the winter as a slow reader, or if you want to, you know, pick it up in the winter to have those good snowstorm trapped in the snow vibes, is kind of near the end of The Stand. And then in different seasons, so each book, it's a collection of novellas, and each of them is based on a different season. The last one is the winter, and it is The Breathing Method. This novella, I remembered everything else from different seasons, which I really recommend, because that one has The Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, and The Body, which is the movie The Stand. And those are all really good. Apt Pupil, like, was horrific for me as a teenager to read it. Like, that was another one of those people are awful stories. But the one I always forget, and someone reminded me of recently, is The Breathing Method. That's the winter story, and it happens in the winter, and it is about a woman who has learned this breathing method for giving birth, and she dies and still gives birth in a very horrible way. So that one I had blocked from my memory. So we'll put that as like you can read this if you want. But if you have any issues around traumatic births or childbirth in general, like I do, like it can be a lot. So those are my recommendations.